What's up, Dragon Brood? Welcome back to, I don't know, deck 8, 9, 10, 12. We're just going to keep putting these decks out multiple times a day until we get to the release of Zendikar Rising. But today we have a really fun deck called Selesnya Counters. And we kind of visited this deck a couple of times with the previous standard, but surprisingly we got some pretty good tools for this in Zendikar Rising. Enough so that I had to debate what even was going to make the cut in this deck, which is something I didn't think we were going to be looking at when the preview started. So this is pretty cool. And before we get into it, you'll know what I got to ask. Remember to like this video so it helps us get seen by more people. Hit the subscribe button because that lets you know you appreciate the work I'm putting into all these deck lists. And then when you hit that notification bell, that's for you, so you get notified every time I have a new video up and you don't miss any of these deck lists coming out. Let's take a look at this Selesnya Counters list. Okay, like I said, we had a little bit of trouble deciding on what cards were actually going to be in this list. So don't come at me in the comments on this. There are a lot of cards that are able to be played in this type of list. And honestly, I don't know which ones are better or worse. This is kind of one of those situations where there's so many options. We're just having to test things. And I can't tell you which one's better yet till we actually play with them. So, you know, take things with a grain of salt. Right now, grain of salt. But right now, what we're doing is we're just experimenting with some of the new cards out of Zendikar Rising and seeing what fits, what works, what doesn't, what land counts better, all of that. And it's a fun deck, y'all. It's a really fun deck. This is one I'm definitely going to look forward to be playing on the Streamer Early Access this coming Wednesday. But let's take a look at this list here. All right, so we're starting out with 4 Stone Coil Serpents. Can't really do without it in this list. It's an easy way to get counters on something. It helps all your other cards trigger. It gets benefits of having counters from all the other cards that care about counters. It's really hard to turn away this card. You kind of have to play it. It's like the basis of where you start a lot of these lists. We're playing a couple copies of Fight as one. I know people kind of look at this and be like, why? But here's the thing. You can give stuff indestructible, which is great. It gets in a bonus till end of turn. That's great. But as we go through this list, we do actually have a couple of cards that are humans. And that makes a difference because you may be able to save 2 creatures, and that's pretty good. Even if you're able to save 1, it would have been worth it. Now, Swarm Shambler, we saw this in the mono green list we put together a couple days ago. Works even better here because you're able to put a counter on it every single turn. So where you have cards that trigger when stuff gets a counter, you get to do that. You know, it gets the benefit of having counters for other things that care about it. So this is a good almost engine card for what the rest of the deck's trying to do. I debated on how many Wildwood Scourges to go with, but ultimately I settled on 4. And I think the issue is we have so many cards that can put counters on every single turn that it felt foolish not to go to 4 of these. Even if you have to play one early as just a 1-1 or a 2-2, it's probably still going to be worth it over the course of 3 or 4 turns when this thing ends up being like an 8-8 or a 10-10 going after your opponents. Obviously, we're going to play a full set of Conclave Mentor. Can't really get around this card. It doubles up all your counters effectively, so it's pretty hard to play without this. And don't forget, I think one of the things people forget in some of their math when they're blocking and whatnot, is this has the ability that when it dies, you gain life equal to its power. That's no small thing. Keep that in mind because sometimes that extra chump block for 3 to 4 life is all you need to stay alive. Now, one of the new cards also here is the Luminar Aspirin. And this card lets you put a counter on every single turn. And it doesn't have to be on it. You can just put a counter on a target creature. So that's a big deal, right? Because you have some stuff that gets bonuses, say like the Wildwood Scourge. You just put a counter on a thing, it gets bigger. And then you have stuff like, the Oran Reef Ooze we'll get to in a little bit, that you can put counters on more things. So they get bonuses as well. But just getting a counter every single turn kind of keeps that engine going where cards care about it. And it kind of doubles up too when you're talking about like Conclave Mentor. You get to put a counter on a thing. You rarely get to put 2 counters on a thing. So it does work in concert with multiple other cards in this list. We're playing Inscription of Abundance for 3 copies. I almost wanted 4. Honestly, I was just having a hard time squeezing room because I'm trying to play so many things. But as I'm going through these lists, I could be wrong, but I'm really starting to believe that Inscription of Abundance is one of the best cards out of this set. Might even be the best green card. I mean, it does so much as it just gives you the best options for 2 mana at instant speed. And then for 5 mana, you get to do very powerful things all in one turn, enough that you could swing a combat entirely by putting 2 counters on a thing, fighting a thing to get something out of the way, or, you know, your opponent goes to attack you and you're like, block, fight, gain life, end up at like 3 life, your opponent's got 2 or 3 things dead. Like, so many things it's doing. And the fact that this puts counters on stuff also allows you to get bonus counters depending on what's on the table and trigger other abilities. Now, this one also caused me a little bit of, I don't know, uneasy strife internally on how many I was going to include. But the biggest thing here is that it gains flying for its landfall. So landfall, when the land comes into play, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on this, and it gains flying until end of turn. Can't really get away from it. The fact that it's putting a +1/+1 counter is super good, and it gets flying. You don't have that many cards. Actually, you have no other cards in this particular list that have an evasive ability, so this could be the thing you need sometimes to come over the top for the last 4 damage or 5 damage or what have you. Can't really overlook that. It's not like it's one of those things, you see it on paper, you see the casting cost, you see it's a 1/1, you're not that excited by it, but it could end up being a very important tool in this deck. We're playing a couple copies of Sagiri Step, or Sagiri Shelter. The Step is a land from 2 Zendikars ago, but we're playing this because it's another way to protect your creatures, and the backside is a land that comes into play tapped, so you can kind of skimp on mana a little bit, which we like. But being able to protect one of your big creatures, you know, say you have like a 5/5 Stonecaller Serpent, or you've built up this Wildwood Scourge to like an 8/8, you don't want it to go down to just some simple eliminate or something like that. So this allows you to kind of protect that and get out of that situation. Honestly, maybe even, you know, Planeswalker tries to, like, Teferi might try to phase it out, and then that could turn a whole combat. So very powerful card, you know, it's just kind of sitting there in the middle of all the powerful things in the set that people's kind of sleeping on it a little bit. Scavenging Ooze, we're only playing 2. I opted whether I was going to play none at all and just let it be a sideboard card. Decided I wanted to play a couple, but it's 2 the right number? Is 3 the right number? I don't know, but there's 2 in here for now. Oran Reef Ooze, this is another one we saw in our mono green list that we built. This is super powerful in the sense that everything we have in here practically either has a counter or can gain a counter. So as soon as you start attacking with the Ooze, it's going to be pumping everything up. Also remember that if you manage to play like Conclave Mentor on 2, you play Oran Reef Ooze on 3, you can have the Ooze come down, put a counter on itself. So now it's got 2 counters, it's a 4/4. Then we go to attack, it's a 5/5. Plus it's going to pump whatever else is on the table. Lots of stuff going on with this card. It is a very, very good card for this list. And then we're only playing a couple of copies of Basri's Lieutenant. I've seen some people in their early list want to play 4 of these. I do like that it protects your creatures. However, I feel like since we're able to play Fight as One and Sagiri Shelter in this list, I don't think we need to have so many Basri's Lieutenants. And with it being slower, you don't necessarily want to have a bunch of them clogging up your hand in the early stages. So I opted just to play 2, because it is still powerful, being protection for multicolor, it's vigilance. Like, it's a good all-around card for 4 mana. But I don't think the protection from board sweepers is as important when we have the deck built the way that we do. And then we're playing 3 Turn Timber Symbiosis and 1 Maria's Call. And this is just kind of still experimenting with being able to cut some lands, being able to play these other mythics that can allow us to have some late game abilities. And, you know, we may actually cast these. The Turn Timber Symbiosis in here is actually pretty interesting because you can take something that costs less than 3 or 3 or less, put it into play, then put 3 +1/+1 counters on it, right? So if it's some of these things that are on the board that trigger, like say Wildwood Scourge or Conclave Mentor where you get a bonus counter, it can be doing other things with stuff that's in this list. So don't sleep on that card for just being like, look, I can come into play untapped as a forest. No, this is an actual card that might do something in the late stages. Here we are playing 16 regular lands. We're playing the Branchwood pathway because it is white on one side, green on the other. That's going to help our mana out a bunch. We're playing all 4 Temples of Plenty, playing a few each of the forests and plains, just to give us kind of a rounded base of lands that come to play untapped, making sure we can cast our early cards because we do have quite a few. But all combined, you know, when you talk about the Turn Timber Symbiosis, the Maria's Call, that's another 4 land. So you have 20 that are going to come into play early. I guess technically you've got 16 because the Temple Plenties do come in tapped, but then you also are supplementing that with 3 more lands in the Sagiri Shelter, so you do have access to 23 lands for a fairly low to the ground deck, not needing a whole bunch of mana. Now, I guess the question is, somebody might ask, how do I think this fares compared to the Selesnya Counters list we just had in this past standard? Honestly, I think it's much better, where you're talking about having the fledgling whatever that gains flying, so that gives you an evasive creature. You've got a fight spell that doubles as a way to pump your stuff in the inscription. You know, you've got creatures that put counters on every turn. You've got the Oran Reef thing that's going to ooze, that's putting on counters every time you attack. Like, you have way more ways to just keep grinding and keep generating counters. You should have very few turns where you don't put a +1/+1 counter on something and start triggering other abilities. And that's something you kind of didn't have in the other list. You were filling in a lot of slots with some kind of okay cards, and they weren't bad. But here, I think the cards are just better at the lower end, which can do some really big stuff over the course of the game. I would even say this is just outright stronger. I don't even think it's just better. I think it's just stronger and maybe even more resilient because you're getting to play the Sagiri's protection spell as well. So I really, really dig it. I do want to say, if you haven't yet, please remember to like this video to get us in front of more people. Hit that subscribe button so you can help me out and let me know how much you love me. And then hit the notification bell so you get notified every time I have a video up, especially right now as we're putting out multiple decks every day leading up to the Zendikar Rising release. I also want to tell everybody, don't forget, if you want to join our Discord, if you want to see my podcast, listen to my podcast, or catch me on stream, all of those links are down below. You'll also be able to get the deck list in the description. And we have a new channel, so if you like seeing my other stuff where you get to see my chickens, see my gardening, see just my outdoor adventures, we're going to keep that separate from my gaming channel, and you can go to PowrDragn Outdoors and find that as well. Also, keep your eyes open because we're going to be doing a nearly all-day stream for the Streamer Early Access event. Thanks to Wizards of the Coast for inviting me to do that. It's going to be a lot going down with Zendikar, folks. Hope you enjoy it. That's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.